Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Since this government came into power, the cost of housing has doubled. 9 out of 10 young Canadians believe that they will never have home ownership. Families from coast to coast to coast cannot even afford the interest on their mortgages. Numerous rankings regularly list Vancouver and Toronto as among the most unaffordable in the world. To put that into context, they are worse than those notorious for their high cost of living like New York. Perhaps the most illustrative comparison is that with our neighbor down south. The United States has just shy of 332 million people living on 9.8 million square kilometers. In contrast, Canada has 38 million people living on 10 million square kilometers. In no world does it make sense that housing should cost twice as much as it does in the U.S., despite the density being nearly 10 times our own. The simple reality, Mr. Speaker, is that this government's mismanagement, coupled with local NIMBY gatekeepers, block development and drive up mortgages and housing costs. This is the only explanation to the fact that we have the fewest homes in the G7 per capita, despite having the most space. The Prime Minister has enabled municipalities that block development and rob our future generations a chance of home ownership. A Conservative government will put an end to that. We will remove the bureaucratic gatekeepers from the equation and free up land and speed up the accreditation and permit process to get more shovels in the ground as soon as possible. This is a dire necessity that needed action yesterday, not tomorrow. Mr. Speaker, in Eastern Ontario, a recent report stated that a region needs to build upwards of 14,000 rental units just to meet demand. This does not include any actual growth, but solely takes into account what we need to build to meet the demand. This is ludicrous and a direct result of the failures of this government at all levels that acquiesce to activists. This crisis, Mr. Speaker, is not just limited to housing. Just last week, I received an email from the Food Sharing Project, which serves Hastings, Lennox, and Addington, and the Kingston area by providing food and equipment to schools. They said the 2022-2023 school year has been unprecedented for the Food Sharing Project. Due to increasing demand and the skyrocketing cost of food, we are facing a significant budget shortfall as we now are sending out over $25,000 in food every week. We need your help to ensure that students do not go through the school day hungry. This is the reality of the Prime Minister's Canada: kids that can't eat and parents that cannot afford shelter. Inflation is at a 40-year high. Canadians are sacrificing on food for shelter. Mortgages have doubled since 2015, averaging approximately $3,000 a month. Mr. Speaker, mortgage interest costs rocketed up to 26% in March alone. Red tape is costing an additional $200,000 on new homes. Average rent has nearly doubled for a 2-bedroom apartment since 2015, increasing to $2,200 from $1,171 a month. Our youth, Mr. Speaker, have lost their dream to home ownership. The current housing crisis is affecting every single riding across Canada. Each and every one of us here in this House are elected to this place to represent our constituents. We've all been contacted by our constituents, and on this side of the House, Mr. Speaker, we have a plan to fix the housing crisis. 6 simple solutions for Canada. Canada's Conservatives will require large urban centres where the cost of living is particularly egregious, like Vancouver, to substantially increase home building in their borders. Those that can't comply will face penalties in the vein of withheld federal funds. This is completely in line with existing legislation regarding provincial governments under the Federal Provincial Fiscal Arrangements Act. We will crack down on everyone's most annoying neighbour, the NIMBYs. We will implement a system for residents to raise concerns about the pandemic obstructionism. And should the decision body decide that the complaint is well-founded, we will supply infrastructure dollars to get those housing units built. In short, Mr. Speaker, we will out-NIMBY the NIMBYs. We will incentivize municipalities to increase their housing capacities by rewarding those that take the necessary steps to build homes in form of a building bonus. This will give the latitude to municipalities to decide how to best address their individual needs instead of a cookie-cutter approach which so often fails in a nation as large and diverse as Canada. Further, we will require any municipality that seeks federal funds to pre-approve high-density and employment applications on available land surrounding areas such as bus and subway stops. This will allow common-sense residential zones to be built around accessible, walkable areas so residents won't need to choose between living downtown and walking to work, or living in the suburbs but requiring a car. Mr. Speaker, this is good policy, not just for the pocketbook, but for the environment. We will take advantage of the recent remote work paradigm by selling off 15% of federal buildings and have them turned into affordable housing. These buildings are generally already located in urban centers and are already built. The only construction will be converting them and rezoning them to residential. We expect this will result 5,500 new residential buildings capable of housing dozens, if not hundreds, of units each. But perhaps most importantly, we will stop printing money. Taking inspiration from the Harper's era one-for-one rule regarding red tape, we will require every dollar that we spend to be matched by a dollar saved. This will end the constant cycle of inflationary bubbles caused by out-of-touch central bankers that on occasion have helped create the current housing and market crisis. I'd also like to take a moment to address something different. I want to take a moment also to address somewhat different housing crisis affecting some Canadians, those in our armed forces. The federal government recently implemented changes to the post-living differential. This is essentially a top-up to CAF members based on where they live. The government rightly sought to update the formula to better address the current economic climate of the posting areas, as the initial computation was done years ago. While the formula was due for an update, what the government did was completely revamp the benefit in a manner that has massive financial implications for longer-serving members. They get penalized for being promoted, penalized for not changing bases, penalized for being married to CAF members, and penalized for succeeding. They are quite literally being penalized the longer they serve. This is having massive consequences for troop morale in a time when retention is quite literally an institutional crisis that cannot be understated. This will add to the already ongoing dearth of long-serving members looking to transition out of the armed forces. Mr. Speaker, this is unacceptable, and it needs to be addressed. To those men and women who are serving or thinking of serving, know that a Conservative government will have your back. Canada's Conservatives will build and bring it home. Thank you.